Sarah's breath caught in her throat when she saw him standing in the doorway. Robert's silver eyes were locked on her. No, on his son, in her arms. The 7-year-old boy was giggling, his wheelchair abandoned across the room as she swayed gently to the music playing from her phone. She had been so caught up in the moment, in making Luca smile for the first time in weeks, that she hadn't heard the front door open. Robert's jaw was tight, his expensive suit somehow making him look even more dangerous in the soft afternoon light of the nursery. "What?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Are you doing with my son?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She was going to lose the only job that kept her off the streets, the only place that felt like home in months. But worse, she was going to lose Luca, the sweet boy who had stolen her heart in just 3 weeks. If you want to discover how Sarah ended up in the home of New York's most feared mafia boss, and what happened in that moment that changed everything, subscribe to the channel and leave in the comments where you're watching from. Each view helps bring more stories like this one. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had stood outside the massive wrought-iron gates of the Walsh estate in Manhattan's Upper East Side, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The job posting had been vague: live-in nanny for a 7-year-old boy, excellent pay, complete discretion required. She had applied out of desperation. Her landlord had given her 48 hours to come up with 3 months back rent, and her part-time job at the diner barely covered food. When the gates swung open automatically, she gripped the straps of her worn backpack tighter. Everything she owned fit in that bag. The mansion before her was something out of a movie. White stone, towering columns, windows that probably cost more than she'd make in a year. 3 black SUVs were parked in the circular driveway, and men in dark suits stood at various points around the property. Their eyes tracked her every movement as she walked up the marble steps. The door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 50s, elegant and stern, looked her up and down. "You're the nanny applicant?" "Sarah Mitchell, ma'am." "I have my interview at—" "Mr. Walsh is running late. Come with me." The woman, Mrs. Chen, the head of household staff, led her through halls filled with art that belonged in museums. "The position is for Luca, 7 years old. He's been through 6 nannies in 4 months. Sarah's stomach dropped. "Why so many?" Mrs. Chen's expression softened just slightly. "The boy doesn't speak. Hasn't since the accident 2 years ago that left him in the wheelchair. Most of the nannies, they treated him like he was broken. Mr. Walsh has very little patience for that." They stopped outside a door covered in superhero stickers, a jarring contrast to the mansion's cold elegance. Sarah could hear music playing inside, something upbeat and cheerful, but no other sounds. "Luca," Mrs. Chen called, knocking gently. "Someone's here to meet you." The music stopped. When the door opened, Sarah found herself looking down at a small boy with dark curls and the most heartbreakingly beautiful grey eyes she'd ever seen. His wheelchair was custom-made, probably cost a fortune, but he held himself stiffly, as if expecting her to look away in pity. Sarah knelt down to his level, ignoring the way her old jeans stretched. "Hi, Luca. I'm Sarah. That's a really cool Captain America poster behind you. He's my favorite Avenger." For just a second, surprise flickered across the boy's face. Then he pointed to his chest and shook his head firmly. "Iron Man?" Sarah guessed. When Luca nodded enthusiastically, she grinned. "Okay, I respect that. Tony Stark is pretty amazing. Do you have a favorite movie?" Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah sat on the floor of Luca's room, asking yes or no questions that he could answer with nods, shakes, or gestures. Mrs. Chen watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. But Sarah wasn't performing for the housekeeper. Something in Luca's eyes, a desperate loneliness that she recognized from her own mirror, made her want to reach through his silence and remind him that he mattered. She was showing Luca photos of a stray cat she used to feed behind her old apartment when a presence filled the doorway. The air itself seemed to shift, becoming heavier, charged with danger. Sarah looked up and her breath stopped. Robert Walsh stood there in a black suit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary, his silver eyes, the same shade as his son's, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and an aura of controlled violence that radiated from him like heat. Everyone in the room straightened unconsciously, including Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Walsh," the housekeeper said quickly. "This is Sarah Mitchell, the applicant. I can see who she is." His voice was deep with a slight rasp that Sarah felt in her bones. He looked at his son. "Luca, Go with Mrs. Chen. I need to speak with Miss Mitchell." Luca's face fell, but he nodded and allowed Mrs. Chen to wheel him out. He looked back at Sarah with pleading eyes. "Don't leave," and something in her chest cracked. When they were alone, Robert moved further into the room. He didn't sit, just stood there studying her with the focus of a predator assessing prey. Sarah scrambled to her feet, very aware of the difference in their heights, their worlds. "You have no childcare certifications," he stated flatly. "No, sir, but no references from previous nanny positions. I've never been a nanny before, but your last job was at Lou's Diner in Queens. You were let go 3 weeks ago because the diner closed." He tilted his head slightly. "You're 3 months behind on rent. Your landlord filed eviction papers yesterday. You have exactly $247 in your checking account." Sarah's face burned. He'd had her investigated, probably knew everything about her down to her shoe size. "I don't have an impressive resume, Mr. Walsh, but I need this job and I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. Your son deserves someone who sees him, not just his wheelchair." Something flickered in those cold eyes. "My son deserves someone who won't abandon him the moment things get difficult. Every nanny leaves. They say it's too hard, too sad, too much responsibility." "I know what it's like," Sarah said before she could stop herself, "to feel invisible, to have people look at you and only see what's broken or missing or not good enough." She met his gaze despite her pounding heart. "I won't look at Luca that way, because I don't see him that way. He's a smart, funny kid who loves Iron Man and plays music too loud and has the most beautiful smile. That's what I see." Silence stretched between them. Robert Walsh was a man who made million-dollar decisions in seconds, who controlled an empire built on fear and loyalty. But looking at this girl with worn clothes and fierce eyes defending his son, he felt something shift in his chest, something he'd locked away the night his wife died and left him alone with a traumatized child. "You'll live here," he said abruptly. "Full-time. Mrs. Chen will show you to your room. You're responsible for Luca's care, education, and well-being from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. I work late. Most nights you'll put him to bed." Sarah's heart soared. "Does that mean—" "It means you start tomorrow. Mrs. Chen will provide the contract details." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Mitchell, if you hurt my son, there is nowhere you can hide that I won't find you. Am I clear?" The threat was delivered calmly, but Sarah didn't doubt he meant every word. This was a man who probably had people killed before breakfast, but she straightened her spine and met his eyes. "If I hurt your son, Mr. Walsh, I'll turn myself in, because any child who's been through what Luca has deserves nothing but love and protection." For just a moment, Robert Walsh's expression softened into something almost human. Then it was gone, and he walked out without another word, leaving Sarah trembling and wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine and revelation. Sarah moved into a bedroom that was bigger than her entire old apartment, with an ensuite bathroom and a view of the private garden. The contract Mrs. Chen presented paid more in 1 month than Sarah had made in 6 at the diner. It felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. But nothing felt more real than the hours she spent with Luca. The boy was brilliant. She discovered that when she started bringing books from the mansion's library to his room. He couldn't speak, but he could read at a level far above his age. He devoured everything from adventure stories to science books, his eyes lighting up in a way that made Sarah's heart swell. She learned his language. A tap on his armrest meant he was frustrated. Pulling at his ear meant he was tired. A specific tilt of his head meant he was joking. Most of the previous nannies had treated his silence as a wall. Sarah treated it as a different dialect, one she was determined to master. Robert Walsh remained a distant figure. He left before dawn and returned after dark, always in those expensive suits, always surrounded by men who looked ready to kill at his command. Sometimes Sarah would hear him checking on Luca after the boy fell asleep, his footsteps pausing outside the door. But he never came in when she was there, never spoke to her beyond brief nods in passing. Until the night everything changed. Sarah was in the kitchen at midnight, unable to sleep, making tea when Robert walked in. She froze, suddenly very aware that she was wearing old pajama shorts and an oversized shirt, her hair messy. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, a cut above his eyebrow that definitely hadn't been there that morning. "Mr. Walsh," she stammered. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to. It's your house too now." He moved to the cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey. His hands were steady, but there was something in his movements, a tightness that spoke of violence recently committed. "You've been here 2 weeks. Luca hasn't cried once." Sarah blinked. "He used to cry?" "Every night. Nightmares about the accident, about his mother." Robert poured 2 fingers of whiskey, drank half in one swallow. "Mrs. Chen says he falls asleep within minutes now, that he smiles during the day. He's an amazing kid," Sarah said softly. "He just needed someone to meet him where he is, instead of where people think he should be." Robert turned to look at her fully for the first time. In the dim kitchen light, his silver eyes were less cold, more haunted. His mother couldn't handle it. The wheelchair, the silence. She started drinking, taking pills, drove her car off a bridge 2 years ago and took out a family in the other lane. His voice was flat, factual. Luca was in the car. He survived. They didn't. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God. He saw everything. He spoke at the funeral, told everyone he loved his mama, then never spoke again. Robert finished his drink. "I've hired specialists, therapists, the best doctors money can buy. They all say the same thing. He'll talk when he's ready, if he's ever ready." "He will," Sarah said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. "Because he has a father who keeps trying, who brings him home to safety every night. That matters more than you know." Robert's laugh was bitter. "Safety. Do you know what I do, Miss Mitchell? What this house is built on?" "I know enough," Sarah said quietly. "I know that 3 SUVs follow your car everywhere, that the men outside carry guns, that people call you boss, with a very specific kind of fear." She met his gaze. "I know you're dangerous, but I also know Luca loves you. He has your picture on his nightstand. He watches the door at 7 p.m. every night waiting for you." Something cracked in Robert's expression. For just a moment he looked young, lost, human. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, and the cold mask slammed back into place. "I have to go. There's a situation." He was already moving toward the door when Sarah called out, "Mr. Walsh?" When he paused, she said softly, "Whatever you have to do out there, come home safe. Luca needs his father." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he was gone, and Sarah was alone in the kitchen, her tea forgotten, wondering why her heart was racing. The next morning, Mrs. Chen pulled Sarah aside with an urgent expression. "Mr. Walsh left instructions. You and Luca are not to leave the property under any circumstances. Additional security has been posted." "What's wrong?" "There's been threats from a rival family, the Castellanos. They're looking for leverage." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. "Anyone close to Mr. Walsh is a target." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Luca is safest here with you. Mr. Walsh trusts you to protect him if needed." The housekeeper pressed something into Sarah's hand. A phone, expensive and new. "This has one number programmed. If anything happens, you call it. Mr. Walsh will come." For the next 3 days, Sarah barely slept. She kept Luca entertained inside, never letting him near windows, always aware of the armed men patrolling the grounds. The boy sensed her tension and grew quieter, more withdrawn. By the 3rd night, Sarah was desperate to bring back his smile. That's when she remembered the music. Luca loved music. It was the one thing that always made him relax. Sarah had been playing instrumental pieces during their lessons, letting the melodies fill the silence he carried. But tonight, as she sat on the floor of his room while he built with Legos, she had an idea. "Hey, Luca," she said softly. "Want to try something?" He looked up, curious. Sarah pulled out her phone, her old one, not the emergency one Mrs. Chen had given her, and scrolled through her music. She found an upbeat song, something with a rhythm that made you want to move. "My mom used to do this with me when I was sad. We'd dance, not fancy dancing, just moving until we felt better." Luca's eyes widened. He pointed to his wheelchair, shook his head. "You don't need to walk to dance," Sarah said gently. She stood up, started swaying to the music, her movement simple and free. "Dancing is just about feeling the music, about letting go of everything heavy." She twirled, smiled at him. "Come on. You can move your arms, right?" Hesitantly, Luca raised his arms. Sarah cheered, encouraging him, and slowly, beautifully, the boy started moving his upper body to the beat. His face transformed, the worry melting away, replaced by something Sarah had only seen glimpses of. Pure joy. "That's it," she laughed, spinning. "You're a natural." The song ended and another began, slower but just as sweet. On impulse, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She walked to Luca's wheelchair, knelt down. "Can I pick you up? We'll dance together." Luca stared at her, then slowly nodded. Sarah lifted him carefully. He was lighter than she expected, all fragile bones and trust. She held him against her chest, one arm under his legs, one around his back, and began to sway gently to the music. Luca's arms came around her neck, his head resting on her shoulder, and then, miracle of miracles, she felt him relax completely. The boy who held himself so carefully, so stiffly, melted into her embrace like he finally felt safe enough to let go. "I've got you," Sarah whispered, spinning slowly around the room. "You're perfect exactly as you are, sweet boy. You know that? You don't have to be any different. You're already everything." Luca's shoulders began to shake, and Sarah realized with a start that he was crying, but not sad tears. These were the kind of tears that came from a dam finally breaking, from emotions too big to hold inside anymore. She held him tighter, still swaying, tears streaming down her own face now. The music played on, wrapping around them like a blessing, and Sarah sent up a prayer of gratitude that she'd found this child, this job, this moment. She was so lost in it that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear the footsteps in the hall, didn't know they were being watched until a voice rough with emotion said her name. "Sarah." She spun around, Luca still in her arms, and froze. Robert stood in the doorway, still in his suit, but something was different. His tie was gone, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were blazing with something she couldn't name, something that made her skin flush hot. "Mr. Walsh," she breathed. "I'm sorry. I should have asked permission. I just thought—" "He's smiling," Robert cut her off, his voice strange, thick. "My son is smiling." Sarah looked down at Luca, and sure enough, even through his tears, the boy was grinning. His small hands were still around her neck, and he looked up at his father with an expression that was pure pride. "Look, Papa, I'm dancing." Robert crossed the room in 3 strides. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought he was angry, but then he cupped her face with one hand, his palm rough and warm against her cheek. "No one," he said hoarsely. "No one has ever made him smile like that. Not since—" His voice broke. "He just needed to feel safe enough to let go," Sarah whispered. She was trembling now, acutely aware of how close Robert was, how his eyes were roaming over her face like she was something precious, impossible. "And you did that." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You gave that to him." Luca made a sound between them. Not a word, but a happy hum, and both adults looked down at him. The boy had his arms out now, reaching for his father. Sarah carefully transferred Luca into Robert's arms, but the boy kept one hand locked around her neck, refusing to let go. So they stood there, the 3 of them connected as the music played on, and something profound and terrifying took root in Sarah's chest. Robert's free arm came around her waist, steady and sure, and suddenly they were all 3 moving together, swaying to the music in the superhero-covered bedroom. A broken Mafia boss, a traumatized boy, and a nanny who'd stumbled into this world by accident, but was starting to realize she never wanted to leave. "Sarah," Robert said softly, his lips close to her ear, "if you ever need anything, if you're ever in danger because of me, you call that number. I will burn the world down to keep you safe." She should have been terrified by the promise. Instead, she felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. After that night, nothing was the same. Robert started coming home earlier, 6 p.m. instead of midnight, joining them for dinner in the formal dining room that suddenly felt warm instead of cold. He'd sit at the head of the table, still in his suit, listening to Sarah tell stories about her day with Luca, while the boy nodded and gestured along. "He organized all his books by color today," Sarah said one evening, cutting Luca's chicken into smaller pieces without making a show of it. "Spent 3 hours on it. I tried to suggest alphabetical, but he gave me this look." She imitated Luca's stubborn expression perfectly, and the boy burst into silent giggles. Robert watched them with an intensity that made Sarah's skin tingle. She'd catch him looking at her across the table, something hungry and careful in his eyes, and her breath would catch. The attraction between them was a living thing now, impossible to ignore, growing stronger every day. But Robert never crossed the line, never touched her beyond accidental brushes of hands, never said anything inappropriate. And Sarah was falling, despite every logical reason not to. A week after the dancing incident, Mrs. Chen knocked on Sarah's door at 7 in the morning. "Mr. Walsh wants to see you in his office before you start with Luca." Sarah's heart hammered as she made her way to the west wing she'd never entered before. Robert's office was all dark wood and leather, weapons mounted on the walls like art, antique guns, a sword that looked medieval. He stood by the window overlooking the garden, phone to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. "Non mi interessa cosa vuole Castellano. La risposta è no." He hung up, turned to face her. In the morning light, Sarah could see the exhaustion carved into his features. "Close the door." She did, her pulse racing. "Is everything okay? Is Luca? Luca is fine. You're keeping him safe." Robert moved closer, and Sarah caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that made her head spin. "The Castellano situation is escalating. They've made direct threats against my family." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "that you're in danger. Anyone in this house is a target. I should send you away. Let you go before—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I'm not leaving Luca," Sarah said firmly. "He needs consistency, stability, people he can count on. Even if it costs you your life?" Robert's voice was harsh now. "These people don't play games, Sarah. They'll hurt you to hurt me. They'll—" He turned away, hands fisting at his sides. Sarah did something crazy then. She reached out and touched his back, felt him go rigid under her palm. "Then protect me. Isn't that what you do? Protect what's yours?" Robert spun around so fast, she stumbled back. He caught her wrists, his grip firm but careful not to hurt. "Don't," he ground out. "Don't say things like that unless you understand what they mean in my world." "Then tell me," Sarah challenged, even though her heart was trying to beat out of her chest. "Tell me what it means." "It means," Robert said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and dark, "that if you're mine, I don't let you go, ever. It means I'll kill anyone who looks at you wrong. It means I'll—" He stopped himself, releasing her wrists like she burned him. "You're Luca's nanny, that's all this can be. Is that what you want?" The words were out before Sarah could stop them. "For that to be all this is?" The sound Robert made was somewhere between a laugh and a growl. "What I want doesn't matter. You're 23 years old. You should be dating boys your age, going to college, living a normal life, not trapped in a mansion with a man who has blood on his hands and enemies at the gates." "I'm 24, Sarah corrected, "and I haven't wanted normal since the day I walked through your gates. I want—" She stopped, terrified to finish. "What?" Robert stepped closer, crowding her space, his eyes blazing. "What do you want, Sarah?" "You," she whispered. "I want you. And Luca. I want this, all of it, even the danger. I want to stay." For a moment, Robert just stared at her. Then his hand was in her hair, tilting her face up, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "You have no idea what you're asking for." "Then show me." He kissed her then, or maybe she kissed him, Sarah couldn't tell, could only feel the desperate press of his lips against hers, the way his arms came around her like he was drowning and she was air. It was nothing like the gentle kisses in movies. This was hunger and need, and two people who'd been holding back for too long finally letting go. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Robert cupped her face with both hands. "If we do this, if you stay, you need to understand. I'm not a good man, Sarah. I've done things that would make you run screaming. My world is violence and secrets and danger." "I know," Sarah said, her hands fisting in his shirt. "I know what you are. I've known since day one. It doesn't change anything. It should, but it doesn't." She rose on her toes, brushed her lips against his again. "I see you, Robert Walsh. Not just the boss, not just the monster everyone else sees. I see the father who checks on his son every night, the man who cried when he saw Luca smile, the person who gave me a chance when I had nothing." Robert made a sound like he was in pain and kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sarah felt herself melting into him. But then voices echoed in the hallway outside, and they broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard. "We can't," Robert said, but his hands were still on her waist. "Not while you work for me. It's not right." Sarah wanted to argue, but footsteps were approaching the office. She stepped back, smoothing her clothes just as the door opened, and one of Robert's men appeared. "Boss, we have a situation. The Castellanos just—" He stopped, eyes flicking between them, something knowing in his expression. "Should I come back?" "No." Robert's voice was all business again, the vulnerable man from moments ago locked away. "Give me 2 minutes." When the door closed, he turned back to Sarah, Go to Luca, keep him inside today, I'll be back by dinner. Robert, this conversation isn't over, he said softly, his fingers brushing her cheek. But I need you safe first. Can you do that for me? Stay safe. Sarah nodded, even though her head was spinning, her lips still tingling from his kiss. She left the office on unsteady legs, her whole world tilted on its axis. That afternoon, while Luca napped, Sarah sat in his room working on the GED study materials she'd been secretly completing at night. She was so focused on the math problem in front of her that she almost missed the sound of breaking glass somewhere downstairs. Her head snapped up. The house was never silent. There were always guards, staff, someone moving around, but now's nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just an eerie, terrible quiet. Sarah's hand went to the emergency phone Mrs. Chen had given her. She started to dial when Luca's door suddenly slammed open. A man stood there, not one of Robert's men. This guy was rough, unshaven, with a scar running down his face and a gun in his hand. His smile was all teeth and cruelty. "Well, well," he said in a voice like gravel. "The famous Nanny. Castellano's going to love this." Sarah threw herself in front of Luca's bed, her body a shield between the intruder and the sleeping boy. Her thumb found the emergency call button and pressed it without looking. "You need to leave," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Now." The man laughed, taking a step closer. "I don't think so, sweetheart. See, you're worth a lot to us. You and the crippled kid. Walsh will give us anything to get you back." "If you touch him," Sarah said, and something in her voice must have conveyed absolute sincerity, "I will make sure you regret it for whatever brief time you have left to live." The man's smile faded. He raised the gun, pointing it directly at her chest. "Last chance. Come quiet or I shoot you and take the kid anyway." Behind Sarah, Luca woke up. She heard his gasp, felt the way the bed shifted as he sat up. Her hand reached back, found his small fingers, squeezed once. "I've got you." "Okay," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Okay, I'll come. Just leave Luca alone, please." The man stepped closer, reaching for her arm, and that's when all hell broke loose. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. The door behind the intruder burst open. Men in black suits poured in from every direction, and suddenly the man with the gun was on the ground, disarmed, screaming. And then Robert was there. He moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his suit jacket gone, blood on his knuckles, his silver eyes wild with a rage that made the air itself seem to burn. He went straight for the man who'd threatened Sarah, hauling him up by the throat. "You touched my family," Robert said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You pointed a gun at them. Boss, we should—" One of his men started. "Get Sarah and Luca out, now." Robert didn't look away from the man, struggling in his grip. "Take them to the safe house. No one follows. No one knows where they are except me." Strong hands, gentle despite their obvious strength, guided Sarah away from Luca's bed. Another guard carefully lifted the terrified boy, wrapping him in a blanket. Sarah tried to look back at Robert, but someone blocked her view. "Don't look, Miss Sarah," the guard said quietly. "You don't want to see what happens next." But she heard it. Heard the sounds of violence, of pain, of a man exacting terrible revenge for a threat against what he loved, and she couldn't bring herself to feel anything but grateful. They were rushed through the house, into a waiting SUV with tinted windows. Sarah held Luca tight as the car peeled out of the driveway, the boys' silent sobs shaking both their bodies. "It's okay," she whispered into his hair, even though her own tears were falling. "Your papa's got us. We're safe. We're safe." But as the mansion disappeared behind them, Sarah wondered if anything would ever really be safe again. The safe house was a fortress disguised as a normal home in the Connecticut countryside. High walls, surveillance cameras hidden in trees, armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Inside it was surprisingly cozy, a lived-in space with comfortable furniture and a well-stocked kitchen, like Robert had prepared for this possibility. Sarah spent the first hour calming Luca down, running him a bath, making him hot chocolate, sitting with him on the couch while he gripped her hand like a lifeline. The boy's eyes were huge, traumatized, and Sarah's heart broke, seeing the progress they'd made start to crumble. "Your dad is coming," she told him over and over. "He's going to make sure we're safe. He promised, and he keeps his promises." But as hours stretched into night, with no word from Robert, Sarah's own fear began to grow. What if something had happened to him? What if the Castellanos had more men? What if— Her phone buzzed at 11 p.m. Robert's number. She answered on the first ring. "Sarah." His voice was rough, exhausted. "Are you both okay?" "We're fine. Scared, but fine." She glanced at Luca, who had finally fallen asleep on the couch, his hand still clutching her sleeve. "Are you—" "I'm coming to you. I'll be there in an hour. Don't open the door for anyone but me." "Robert, what happened? That man is never going to threaten you again. None of them will." Something in his tone made Sarah shiver, not with fear, but with the realization of just how far Robert would go to protect them. "Sarah, we need to talk when I get there about everything." "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." When Robert arrived, he looked like he'd been through war. His white shirt was splattered with blood. None of it his, she hoped. His knuckles raw and bruised. But his eyes went straight to Luca, and the relief in them was so profound that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "He's asleep," she said quietly. "He was terrified, but he's okay now." Robert knelt by the couch, his large hand gentle as he brushed Luca's dark curls back from his forehead. "I'm sorry," he murmured to his sleeping son. "I'm so sorry you had to see that, to go through this." Then he stood and turned to Sarah, and the mask he wore for the world, the cold-controlled mob boss, cracked completely. "Come here." Sarah went to him without hesitation, and Robert pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. His face buried in her hair, and she felt the shudder run through his whole body. "When I got that call," he said hoarsely, "when I heard you were in danger, I've never moved that fast, never felt that kind of fear." "I'm okay," Sarah said, her arms around his waist, not caring about the blood on his clothes. "You got there in time. You saved us." Robert pulled back just enough to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You saved yourself. You put your body between him and that gun without hesitation. You could have run, Sarah. Could have left Luca and saved yourself." "Never," Sarah said fiercely. "I would never abandon him." I know you wouldn't." Robert's forehead dropped to rest against hers. "That's why I need you to understand what I'm about to say, what I'm about to ask you." Sarah's heart hammered. "What?" "The Castellano family is finished. Tonight I made sure of that. But there will always be others. Always be threats, danger, people who want to hurt me through the ones I love." His hands tightened on her face. "I can't keep you safe if you're just the nanny, if you're just an employee. These people, they won't respect boundaries, won't care about collateral damage." "What are you saying?" Robert's eyes bore into hers, intense and desperate. "I'm saying I need you to be my family. Really be my family. Not just someone who works for me, but someone under my protection. Someone no one would dare touch because of what it would mean." Sarah's breath caught. "Robert, I'm asking you to marry me." The words came out rushed, raw. "Not because I'm trying to trap you or because I think I own you. I'm asking because I'm completely terrifyingly in love with you, and I need the whole world to know you're mine so I can keep you safe." The room spun. Sarah stared at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who was looking at her like she held his entire world in her hands. You love me. From the moment I saw you sitting on the floor with my son, treating him like he mattered, like he wasn't broken." Robert's voice cracked. "You gave him back his smile, Sarah. You gave me hope that maybe I wasn't completely lost to this life. You walk into a room and everything feels lighter, possible. Like maybe I can be something more than just the monster everyone thinks I am." "You're not a monster," Sarah said, her own tears flowing freely now. "You're a father who loves his son, a man who protects his people. You've done terrible things, I know that. But you've also given me a home when I had nothing. You've made me feel safe, valued, important. Then marry me," Robert said again. And now he was on his knees in front of her, this mob boss, who made grown men tremble, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, giving you everything you deserve." Sarah looked at him, really looked, at the blood on his clothes from violence done to protect her, at the raw knuckles from fighting his way to her side, at the eyes that had been so cold when they met, but now blazed with love and desperation. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was messy and complicated and dangerous, but it was also real. He was real. And she loved him. God help her, she loved him completely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Robert surged to his feet and kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. His hands were everywhere, her face, her hair, her waist, but always gentle, always asking permission even in his desperation. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying. I know this isn't normal, Robert said, his forehead pressed to hers. I know I'm asking you to enter a world that's dark and dangerous, and nothing like what you deserve. Stop, Sarah cut him off. Stop apologizing for who you are. I choose this. I choose you. I choose Luca. I choose us. A sound made them both turn. Luca was awake, sitting up on the couch, his eyes wide and fixed on them. For a moment Sarah's heart stopped. Had he heard everything? Was he upset? Then the boy smiled, that beautiful rare smile that lit up his whole face, and he did something he'd never done before. He clapped his hands together, silent applause, pure joy radiating from him. Robert laughed, the sound choked with emotion, and held out his arm. Come here, son. Luca wheeled himself over. His chair had been brought to the safe house with their emergency bags, and the three of them came together in the middle of the room. Robert lifted his son into his arms, Sarah's hands on both of them, and they stood there like that, a family forged in fire and fear and fierce, impossible love. I have to tell you something, Sarah said suddenly, looking up at Robert. I never went to college. I barely graduated high school. I'm not sophisticated or educated or anything special. You're everything, Robert interrupted. You're the woman who loves my son, who stood between him and danger without hesitating, who makes this house feel like a home instead of a prison. That's more than special, Sarah. That's extraordinary. I'm studying for my GED, she admitted, at night after Luca's asleep. I want to go to college, maybe study child psychology or education. I want to be better, to deserve this. Robert cupped her face, his expression fierce. You already deserve it, but if you want to study, I'll pay for the best schools in the country. If you want a degree, 10 degrees, whatever makes you happy, it's yours. Luca tapped his father's shoulder, pointed at Sarah, then at his own chest and Robert's. His meaning was clear. She belongs with us. Yes, Robert said, kissing his son's forehead. Yes, she does. That night, after Luca was settled in his room, Sarah lying on the floor beside his bed until he fell asleep, just like at the mansion, she and Robert sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. What happens now? Sarah asked quietly. Now we go home. The Castellano threat is eliminated permanently. I'm implementing new security protocols. No one gets within 50 feet of you or Luca without being vetted. Robert's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. And we plan a wedding. Small if you want, just us and Luca and a few trusted people, or big if that's what you prefer, whatever you want. Small, Sarah said immediately, just the people who matter. Good. Robert turned to look at her, his free hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. I need to tell you something. About the man who broke into the house today. Sarah tensed. What about him? He's alive. Barely, but alive. He's being held somewhere he'll never escape from. Robert's voice was careful, measured. I need you to understand. I'm not a good man, Sarah. What I did to him, what I'm capable of doing, it's necessary in my world. To protect what's mine. But I'll understand if you need time to process that. To decide if you can really live with it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, he pointed a gun at a 7-year-old boy, at a child in a wheelchair who's already been through so much trauma. He was going to hurt us. She looked up at Robert, her eyes clear and steady. I'm not naive enough to think violence is never necessary. I grew up in neighborhoods where people got hurt every day, where the police didn't come when you called, where you had to protect yourself or die. I know what the real world is like. This is different. Is it? Sarah challenged gently. You protect your family. That's what you do. Sometimes that means making hard choices, doing hard things. I don't need you to be a white knight, Robert. I need you to be exactly who you are. Someone strong enough to keep us safe, but soft enough to hold your son while he cries. You're both things, and I love both sides of you. Robert stared at her like she'd just given him something precious and impossible. Then he kissed her, slow and deep, and Sarah felt the last of her doubts melt away. They spent that night talking about his childhood, raised by a father who taught him the business through violence and fear, about her mother who died when Sarah was 15, leaving her alone and struggling, about Luca, about plans for his future, about hope. As dawn broke over the Connecticut countryside, Robert pulled Sarah closer and said quietly, I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking for what you deserve, Sarah replied, her eyes already closing with exhaustion. I'm just asking for you. And in that safe house, surrounded by armed guards and security systems, Robert Walsh, feared mob boss, ruthless leader, dangerous man, finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have something good in his life. 3 years later, Sarah stood in the garden of the Walsh estate, watching as Luca wheeled himself across the lawn toward his therapy dog, a massive German shepherd named Hero, who'd been trained specifically for him. The boy was 10 now, still silent but so much more confident, more open. He attended a private school that specialized in non-verbal communication, had friends, played adaptive sports. And 6 months ago, in front of his speech therapist, his father and Sarah, Luca had spoken his first words in 5 years. "Love you, Mum." Sarah's hand went to her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with a daughter they'd already named Grace. Her rings caught the sunlight, the engagement ring Robert had given her a week after his proposal, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and the wedding band she'd worn for 2 years now. Their wedding had been small, just as she'd wanted, held in the mansion's garden with Luca as the ring-bearer, Mrs. Chen crying in the front row, and a handful of Robert's most trusted men standing guard while pretending not to smile. The threats hadn't stopped completely. They never would in Robert's world, but they'd diminished significantly. Word had spread about what happened to the Castellanos, about what Robert Walsh would do to protect his family. Most people decided it wasn't worth the risk. Sarah had gotten her GED, then enrolled in online college courses in child psychology. She still worked with Luca, not as a nanny anymore, but as his mother. She'd legally adopted him 6 months after the wedding, and the look on his face when they'd told him had been worth everything. Arms came around her from behind, Robert's hands settling over her belly. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come," Sarah said, leaning back against his chest. "How different life is now from 3 years ago, when I was about to be evicted from a crappy apartment." "Best decision I ever made, hiring you," Robert said, his lips brushing her temple. "Best decision I ever made, saying yes." Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved. He'd changed too, still dangerous, still powerful, but softer around the edges. He smiled more, laughed more, had started legitimate business ventures alongside the family operations, slowly transitioning towards something less dark. "I love you," Robert said, like he did every day, like he needed her to hear it. "I love you too," Sarah replied, like she always did, and always would. Luca called out from across the lawn, his voice still quiet, still hesitant, but there. "Mom, Dad, come play." Robert and Sarah looked at each other and grinned. Then, together, they walked across the grass toward their son, toward the life they'd built from chaos and fear and impossible love. As Sarah knelt beside Luca's wheelchair, as Robert dropped down next to them, as Hero barked happily and the afternoon sun painted everything gold, she thought about that scared girl who'd stood at the gates 3 years ago, who'd had nothing but hope and determination. That girl would have never believed this future was possible, but here Sarah was, living it. And she'd never been more grateful for taking that chance, for walking through those gates, for choosing love, even when it came wrapped in danger. Some stories, she'd learned, don't follow the rules. Some love stories start in the darkest places and somehow find their way to the light. And some families aren't born, they're chosen, fought for, protected with everything you have. This was hers, and she wouldn't change a single thing. This story has reached its end. If it touched your heart in any way, leave your like and share it with someone who also enjoys emotional stories. New stories arrive soon. Until next time.